All right. Thank you, everyone online, for joining us. We are at the last day of COP15 in Montreal with an agreement in hand. And we are, the Face of the COP15 Coalition, wanted to provide just a quick recap of the experience of our coalition here in Montreal, as well as a kind of immediate analysis of the framework. The framework was only adopted a couple hours ago, and so we're still kind of combing through the text in greater detail, but wanted to provide you all with at least our top line takeaways from what is in the agreement, what looks good, what maybe we wish was a little bit better, and then we'll also provide some thoughts on the work of our coalition and then what we will be up to moving forward. So we have the members of our coalition core team who's going to walk us through this session, and I'm going to have each of you just introduce yourselves before you answer my first question. So I'll start with you, Alex. You've been tracking things really closely and have been reading the text that was adopted last night. So what are your impressions? Like, what are we happy about? What do we wish maybe was a little bit better?
Thank you, Wesley. So hello, everyone. I'm Alex from Sokagaka International. So out of the text that was adopted just a few hours ago, we can say that it is a deal that has the potential for really transformative action. So I think it's something we can be really proud of. And so in terms of the mission and the vision that it sets forward, it's really the mission and vision of halting and reversing biodiversity loss by 2030 with the vision towards 2050. And it really calls for urgent action to protect and restore 30% of the earth, land and water by 2030. So that's an ambitious goal. And I think that is a very important step forward. It also calls overall for the really actions to establish sustainable use, to reduce our footprint. And for the first time, the framework mentions agroecology as one of the ways to move forward. That's very important for many also local communities, indigenous people, just naturally uses these practices, but they are recognized as biodiversity-friendly practices, and that has potential for transformative action. Another great element is that the framework really significantly recognizes the rights and contributions, especially of indigenous peoples and local communities, over land, over their traditional knowledge, over their territories. It does recognize the participation and contribution of children and youth, of women. It recognizes access to justice and full protection of environmental human rights defenders. These are key elements. It does overall recognize the need for a human rights-based approach through implementing the framework. And I think in that sense, it really has a potential to contribute to the right to a clean, healthy and sustainable environment, which is also mentioned in the framework. So that's really positive. Now, some of the aspects of the framework, I think, are weaker and will need to be addressed both at the national level and also with a vision of the whole of society approach to really both take action and take our governments, hold them accountable, and to really ask for more. One of the weak points is that in the implementation part of that framework, the way the ratcheting mechanism to increase ambition and action is currently set as voluntary. So this is seen by many as something weak, and it will be up to civil society to push for that. From another perspective also of several civil society vision, there is the mention of biodiversity offsets. The thinking behind that is problematic because it does mean that you can dispose. It means that you can basically disregard the loss of biodiversity somewhere to create credit, to create it somewhere else. But once biodiversity is lost, it's lost. So the thinking behind that in terms of living in harmony with nature is problematic. And then there was also a call to a strong mandatory reporting requirements for businesses. This is not in the text. That was called by businesses as well, for by businesses. And I think this is also something that is weak, but that altogether we can also make sure that it will be implemented. Now maybe the last point, I think that the framework has this big transformative potential, but we still saw, and they did reach a deal on the resource mobilization, so finances, but we still saw during the adoption a deep mistrust and divide between Global South and Global North still overall. And I think this needs to be addressed in a way where we think about action in a more holistic way, where we think about taking action in solidarity, where we can really live together and contribute together. So there will be need for really addressing injustices in a holistic way. And I think in that sense, faith communities have a big role to play. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alex. So it sounds like something definitely worth celebrating, a historic moment for sure. But there's definitely a role for civil society to play in making sure that we make it even more ambitious than it is. And we'll touch on that a little bit later in our panel. And just as a reminder for folks joining us, we will be having more in-depth analysis of the framework in the new year. So this is just sort of our initial reactions to what was adopted last night. So I want to move now on to Amy. Obviously, the big news is what happened last night with the adoption of the framework, but also I would say another really important element has been the participation of civil society in this process. We are in the sort of big civil society room where we are live streaming this, and COP15 was the first time that a multi-faith coalition participated in a CBD COP. And so I'm wondering if you can speak to the process of developing that coalition and sort of what impact our presence here had on civil society space and maybe the whole proceedings.
Thank you, Wesley, and hello everyone viewing online. My name is Amy Wolam-Echeverria with Columban Missionaries. And you're absolutely right, Wesley. I think one of the really important, valuable contributions that we've made as a multi-faith coalition is being present in a coordinated, visible way that is very much collaborative with the other major groupings and caucuses in civil society, the indigenous people, local communities, women, youth, other NGOs, civil society NGOs, etc. And this has been a process that's been building for several years now. We've been following the GBF process for at least two or 3 years. And one of the nice things is, I think we've been able to project a kind of positive energy and a vision that is substantive, that is meaningful, that is diverse. And, I think that's a really important thing that we as a multi-faith coalition witnesses, is that, we come together in our diversity, not because we have to, not because it's the right thing to do, but because it's the natural way of things. We believe as people of faith that there is richness in diversity, and that the source of creation, the Creator, has made it so, has made it this way. And so we feel that there's great benefit and witness to come together as a coalition. And so when we began several years ago, I'm not sure, Gopal, how many exactly were in our coalition, but just here in Montreal, we were present approximately 55 or more organizations from different faiths, all the major faiths from around the world, endorsed our statement and lended their voice and support. And we had a WhatsApp group that grew from probably 20 to nearly 80 or so. So just in these last 2 weeks, we can feel this sense of people being drawn into the work of the coalition. And I think these past few years and very intensely these last 2 weeks, that this sense of forming, growing, solidifying, root taking is moving us now in this Kunming-Montreal GBF towards an ever-expanding ecosystem of faiths. So I think there's a lot to celebrate. As faiths, we live in hope and kind of readiness, alertness, ready to respond and implement the GBF. And we do that in a great spirit of collaboration. And so I think that's the deep foundation that we come to this space, is a long-term commitment. That's one of the other, I think, really valuable contributions that people of faith make, is that we're not here for the high moments, but we're here for the duration. And so living in that patient persistence, active on the ground, unifying in our diversity, is something that we bring and can contribute in perhaps not measurable ways like we often talk about in the GBF, but in really qualitative and substantive ways. Thanks.
Thank you, Amy. I think the witness here in Montreal has been really important, especially given how much a whole of society response has been an integral part of the conversations happening here, and I know is mentioned in the text as being pretty critical to the implementation of the framework. And so now I want to turn it over to a discussion of the framework and the implementation of the framework and sort of what happens next, particularly from our perspective as a faith coalition. Like, what kind of work can our coalition hope to do in terms of doing our part to make the targets of the GBF possible? And so I'm going to hand it over to Gopal to sort of walk us through that. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you, Wesley. Thank you also, Alex and Amy, for your remarks. Many of you will know me. I'm Gopal Patel from Bhumi Global, and just so grateful for the time we've had together over the last 2 weeks. We've had about 2 hours of sleep last night. But we're all very excited about the future and what this framework means for the future of our planet. We've been talking about what the future is for our coalition, and I want to offer 3 ideas or 3 suggestions, almost using nature as a metaphor, of like 3 expanding circles for how we can implement the GBF. The first is that the first inner circle is we all have to read the text, understand it, and do something that I think all of us as faith communities do, is help translate obscure texts and obscure messages in a way that is relevant and accessible for our communities. So let's all read the text, understand it, and share it with our communities as much as possible, so there's as widespread understanding of what the text is, what the goals are, what the targets are. So that's the first thing I think we could all be doing. The second thing, the next circle, is then how do we implement it in our own communities? I think a lot of us in our faith communities are already doing a lot of the work around protecting and restoring biodiversity. And I think in a lot of our conversations here with the faith community, we oftentimes do climate change work. Well, we do biodiversity work, but we call it climate change work. And I think this framework will help us, allow us to expand our understanding of the work we're doing. Oftentimes we're doing biodiversity work, oftentimes we're doing ecosystem restoration work. And so this framework will help us understand the scale or the context of the work we're doing, and hopefully help us think through, what do we want to do by 2030? What are our own internal goals and metrics and targets as faith-based communities? So that's the second circle. Where do we want to be by 2030? And then the third circle is, how do we want to be in community with other faith communities and civil society? We are not islands. We are part of an ecosystem of faiths and an ecosystem of humanity living trying to live in harmony and balance with the natural world. And so that third circle is, how do we work together? And I think these are all things, these three things: understanding the text and translating it, building out our own plans, and understanding how we can work together as a community. So I think those are the three key things and initial thoughts that we can all reflect on. And certainly, as you said, Wesley, in the new year, we'll be coming together, not just in the new year, but over the next year and over until 2030, strategizing, thinking, planning, building a movement of faiths as we work towards the implementation of the GPF. Thanks.
Yes, I already have COP16 on my brain, so we'll see you all in Turkey. So I want to just wrap up our time together, again, with the recognition that this is a very preliminary conversation about what was adopted last night, and that we will be having more of these conversations to dig into detail about the framework and kind of its implications for our work. But I want to end on maybe a more personal level and just have each of us maybe offer one thought or one feeling that's on our hearts as we leave Montreal. I'm getting on a plane in like 3 hours to go back to my normal life, which seems very strange after 2 weeks here. So yeah, what are we taking with us? And I guess as the moderator, I'll take the liberty of offering my own thoughts, which is that last night when the COP president announced that the package had been adopted, it was a very thrilling moment. I've never been in a COP like this, or at all. But I have been working in the faith-based ecology space since 2015, and I remember very clearly how the adoption of the Paris Agreement was one of the very first major milestones of my professional career in the space. And the excitement I felt, the excitement that my staff at the time felt for that historic moment, and that the world felt really, and that in the intervening years, we sort of have recognized that the agreement itself, the paper, is not worth anything if we don't put it into action. And I think there's been conversations here about how the Aichi targets from 10 years ago or 12 years ago face sort of a similar outcome, that we can have pretty words, but if we don't do something with them, they are just going to say pretty words. And so I am feeling motivated in a way that I didn't expect to make sure that even though the agreement here is not perfect, we as civil society, as people with a moral right and responsibility to help make the world a better place for all life, can ratchet up ambition. We don't have to just leave it to governments to ratchet up the ambition that was decided on here. So that's sort of what I'm hoping to do in the coming years, and that's what I'm sort of feeling as I leave Montreal. So I'll just go down the row and pass the mic. So Alex.
Thank you, Wesley. So I guess for me, as of this moment, I feel a renewed sense of determination to really take action and to question my thinking. So to not take this framework as just the benchmark for it sets a vision, but not to take it as the highest possible benchmark. There is much more we can do in a very holistic and solidarity way. So I do want to also look at it critically from the implementation perspective, to take it as an opportunity to really create the society we want to have, which is in harmony with each other, solidarity, justice, and I think at the local level, it's really where we can have this not just as idealistic words, but it's a very concrete ways. So I guess I'm filled with, this is a next step up to us to make it truly transformative, and my personal take is that I am determined to contribute to do so.
So for me, coming out of the Catholic Christian tradition and being in the time of Advent, last night at, around midnight, 1 a.m., in the dark of night, I had a feeling come over me, a Christmas Eve moment in which, I felt this exhaustion, the exhaustion of waiting for several hours for the ministers to come back into the room and deliver a message of hope and commitment. And I realized that so often in my experience that in our liturgical calendars, our traditions in the dark of night, exhausted and tired, waiting for something joyful to come into the room. And I really felt like, it was a midnight mass experience, it was a manger experience, it was seeing light in the darkness. And so I take that with me because we're just having some technical issues to attend to. Thanks, Wesley.
That's fine.
So I take that with me that even in the most difficult and exhaustive of times, over the years ahead, that will be challenges ahead to draw back onto this night and say, it is possible. The world can come together. Light does shine in the darkness. And so I take that feeling of hope, permanent hope in the face of challenge. And I also take the call that you made, Gopal, to read the text, not as technicians, but as people of faith, to read the document, certainly not as a sacred text, but no, please don't do that. But through the lens of our sacred texts. Yeah. So, we're not technicians. We may be knowledgeable, experienced, trained in many of the issues and workings of the process, but we don't come as technicians, primarily, I think. And so that invitation to really spend time with the text and read it through the lens of our meaningful messages and the images and the practices that we have. I think probably universally in all of our different traditions, in different ways, we have connection with elements other than human life that bring us meaning and nourishment and sustenance. So connecting with those again as we internalize and externalize what's happened here. Thanks.
Thanks both. Speaking from my tradition, from a Hindu perspective, and I'm sure shared by other traditions, is that everything has its time. And I've been reflecting on this moment and the GBF being adopted now in this moment of where we are as a human family, the state of the planet. And this GBF is 2 years late. It's called the Post-2020 Global Biodiversity Framework, was supposed to be agreed upon 2 years ago. But what's happened in the 2 years? We've had the pandemic, where we've seen the effects of us exploiting and using nature in unsustainable ways. And it also comes a number of years after the Paris Agreement, as you mentioned, Wesley, and we've seen how stuck that process is, and we're not going to hit those Paris Agreement of 1.5. And so this agreement comes after, some hope after Paris, some real pain during the pandemic. And I feel like this framework comes at a moment in time where we can really turn the page. We can learn the lessons, the good and the bad, of recent years, and see how we can do things differently, so we can chart a new course for how we live in harmony and balance with the natural world. And so that's what I'm really reflecting on, is that there's a time and a place for everything, and there's a reason for everything. And although the last 2 years were difficult and the negotiations were protracted, I think this framework has come at the right time, that we can receive it in the way it's supposed to be received, so that we can move forward in the way we'd like to. So that's how I've been reflecting.
Thank you to all three of you for walking us through that. Both your own sort of personal reflections on the framework as well as the framework itself. There is so much more to be discussed, but we've got planes to catch and holidays to celebrate, and so I think we're going to call it a wrap for today with the hope and the knowledge that we will be back in the new year with more in-depth discussion about what is in the framework and also what our response as a community of faith will be. And so I will just say, please keep an eye on our website, which is biodiversity.faith, as well as wherever you might find us on social media. And we will see you all in 2023 to put this framework into action, yes. Right? So thank you all for joining us. And we wish you happy holidays to those who are celebrating, and we'll see you in 2023. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
How are you?
All right.